Hi, my name is Salena Zito. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which I fondly call the Paris of Appalachia. It's a little bit different than Washington. I sort of get hives when I get here, or my car breaks down if you read me at all. But thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk a little bit, probably a little bit different than anything that you have heard, but it's based on my reporting as a journalist, not only for the Examiner and for the New York Post, but leading up to 2016 for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. I've always been a national political reporter and columnist, and I've covered American politics for 20 years. So one of the most important things I think we need to understand about what's going on in this country and what conservative populism is and how that impacts our economic nationalism is that what happened in 2016, Donald Trump did not cause. This has been, he is the result of it, but he certainly didn't cause it. And I think part of the big problem is that we didn't see it coming, in particular if you lived in the larger cities outside of, if you lived in the larger cities such as New York or Washington, D.C., because the world is very different than it is here. I first noticed something different going on in about January 2006. And it was right before the January 2006. I first noticed something was going on differently in the country, and that was during the beginning of the wave of the 2006 midterm elections. George W. Bush was president. Republicans have held control since 1994. And everything seemed at that moment on the outside as though the Republicans would continue to hold the House. I was in Western Pennsylvania at an Italian Sons and Daughters Hall. I don't know if you guys have these anymore here in Washington, but it's a pretty common kind of social hall. And they were all coming to see Jason Altmaier, a healthcare professional who was running for the House, a Democrat that was running against Melissa Hart. Now, if you know anything about Western Pennsylvania, is anybody here from Pennsylvania? Yay! Anybody here from Pittsburgh? A Yinzer, welcome. You know that these voters in Western Pennsylvania have a Democrat in their registration, but they tend to be very socially conservative. And they had been voting Republican since 1994 in this district, which was just west of Pittsburgh. It didn't include Pittsburgh. And Melissa Hart had won that seat comfortably for years. And I show up at this hall for people to hear Jason Altmaier, and it was packed to the rafters, and people were going out the door. And I was like, what? Everybody loves Melissa Hart. All of these people love Melissa Hart. And so I started interviewing people, and they still like Melissa Hart, but they didn't like the Republican Party. They didn't like what it had become. They thought that it was too much emphasis on the war, that the people that represented them weren't representing their interests, were ignoring the economic problems that were going on, and that they were disconnected. The Republican Party was disconnected from the people that voted for them. And while they didn't like Democrats any much more than they liked Republicans, they wanted to send a message to the Republican Party. And Rahm Emanuel brilliantly picked candidates that were pro-life, pro-gun, fiscally responsible. In other words, they were Republicans, except they had the D after their name. And I understood right then and there is that people were moving away from political parties, and they were more focused on their communities, which, by the way, Washington had been forgetting about for decades. They forgot about the community, and Washington was more focused on Washington. And so that was I remember writing in January 2006, it's over. The Republicans are going to lose. And I remember talking to Karl Rove, and I think there was a thing called voter vault at that time. And he said, no, our voters are showing up. I said, oh, yeah, they are. But they're not showing up for your people. And they lost. And the lesson here is the one that Washington never understands and never learns. Voters keep sending Washington a message with its vote, and Washington keeps ignoring it. So what did America do? They put Democrats in charge, right? They put Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House. Or Harry Reid was the Senate Majority Leader, and pretty soon John McCain was going to lose to Barack Obama. They sent all of these Democrats to office because they promised change. Except what they did is spend their money as badly as Republicans did. They brought a big government. There was TARP. There were cash for clunkers. There were government bailouts, and all of a sudden the health care. And voters said, "This is not why we sent you to Washington. You think we like you again. We just want you to be better than Republicans." And they weren't. So what happens in 2010? We have another wave election. Now, all of the signs were there for us to understand that history could possibly repeat itself. In 1896, we had the only other true populist election in our history. And what preceded that? Two big wave elections where where power shifted by 100 seats each time. An industrial revolution and the Great Panic of 1893. Well, look at what was happening to us. We've had a technological revolution that is changing us dramatically. You know, 20% of men in this country make over $100,000 a year moving something from point A to point B in a truck or a delivery system or a car. Don't you think that they understand technology is going to change that? That drones are going to change that? Driverless cars. I live in Pittsburgh. We have driverless cars everywhere. It's freaky. I don't like it. But they understand that they're in a tenuous position. They don't understand what the future holds. So you have this uncertainty that technology was creating. It also has caused, we have been losing jobs in this country to technology since 1920. And the only time that we sort of had a false moment where we didn't think that was going to happen was during World War II. And that's because we were making all the things to facilitate our soldiers. But then if you look at history, you'll see by the 60s and the 70s, 10 years after we built all the highways and built all the bedroom communities after World War II, steel industry starts to die. It's not as trade deals have really given people in the Midwest or places where I come from something to gripe about because they've been fighting against them. Honestly, it's been automation and technology that's really had the largest impact on their jobs. And we don't think about that. And I know that they understand that. In 2014, we had an additional wave election. Republicans held more seats than they have held since their historic high since 1928, right before Hoover and the crash, and things got crappy for Republicans. So the voters believed that conservatism was on their side. But what happened in 2012? Barack Obama's team made you believe, if you lived in the industrial Midwest or in the heartland, that Mitt Romney wasn't the guy who was going to save your job. He was going to be the guy who brought the box in and helped you leave from your job. He didn't light that fire in people in the way that Trump did. The evidence was there that a Republican could win in 2012, but there wasn't that, they weren't able to coalesce around Romney because he didn't convey the thing that they were looking for. And what were people looking for? That you have their back. And almost everyone missed that. I didn't. In When Donald Trump came down the escalator in 2015, can anybody be honest enough in here to say that they thought he was going to win? Okay. When he came down the escalator, I didn't think he was going to win. When he was done with his speech, I thought he was going to win. Why? Because it was the exact same speech that Bill Clinton gave in 1992 when he announced his presidency. I mean, not word for word, but it was about the dignity of work, about having your back. It was about community. One of the things that, if you read my book with Brad Todd, The Great Revolt, and it's Prime Day, so you can just go on Amazon and it'll be good. One of the things that was really interesting when we did our book, The Great Revolt, is that, you know, a lot of people misunderstood the Trump voter. They thought that they were angry. We did extensive polling. 84% of the Trump voter is very happy with their life and the trajectory in their life. Can anybody guess what the thing they're most concerned about? JD talked about it powerfully today. It's community, right? Legacy, community. They look at the community around them, and they see it. When Donald Trump said that there was carnage in this country, if you drove anywhere 15 minutes outside of any large city in this country, you will find carnage. It was not an exaggeration. Not to say that he doesn't exaggerate. I'm not saying that. So I understood that he could win the nomination in 2016 at that moment. What cemented it for me was covering the Iowa caucuses in 2016. Does everybody know how a caucus works? You sort of walk into a room like this and you have 4 people on your list. And I would, you know, and it's done by people either standing up or raising their hands, and the majority person wins. So you have at least 4 people in your list. And I was talking to people before the caucus, and the first person they always had on their list, Ben Carson. Because remember, Iowa caucus voters that are Republicans are all evangelical or conservative Christians. They are. The second person, and I said, why? And he goes, well, he's just like us. He shares our values. Second person, always Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Same reason, shares our values. Third person, always Ted Cruz. We don't like him, but he shares our values. I'm not kidding. Fourth person was always Donald Trump. And they'd be like, he is just mean enough to go to the mattresses for us on the things that were important to us. And the things that were important to them was the religious liberty. They profoundly believed that this was the last time in this generation to be able to get a conservative on the Supreme Court. They thought, if not, it was gone for a generation, possibly 2. And that was one of the most motivating things. And they're one of the archetypes in our book. We called them King Cyrus Christians, after King Cyrus, because he had nothing in common with the Jews that he led out of slavery into Jerusalem, but he was just mean enough to make it happen. Sort of the same idea. So by Iowa, I knew it was cemented. By July of 2016, I drove across my state of Pennsylvania. There are 67 counties. I drove through all 67 counties. I do not, as a rule, as a journalist, I don't fly. I don't take a highway. I always take the back roads. I always stay in a bed and breakfast because the first person that I meet is a small businessman or woman, and they know where all the bodies are buried. And thank you. And when I drove across my state, I had one thing in mind that then a lot of people in the national press did not understand about my state. Every year on election night, there's a screen, Wolf Blitzer stands in front, he points to Pennsylvania, he says it's blue, and y'all forget about Pennsylvania because you think it's always going to be blue. It's been that way since 1988. What they missed is that since 1992, when Clinton beat H.W. Bush, Pennsylvania has become 0.4 more Republican, 0.4% more Republican every 4 years. So what does that mean? Bill Clinton won 28 of our 67 counties in 1992. In 2012, Barack Obama won 13 of our 67 counties. But y'all didn't know that. So I already knew that it was primed for that. I drove around, I identified 10 counties that were just this shy of 2,000 votes shy in each of these 10 counties for Mitt Romney. And I understood that Donald Trump only needed to get 2,000 more votes in those 10 counties. And the evidence was not just in the anecdotal reporting, the evidence was also in the signage. Now, people think, my co-author, Brad Tatt, always says, Zito, signs don't vote. That's true, but this was different. These were homemade signs. I saw houses painted with Trump on the side. I saw barns. I even saw a horse with Trump painted on the side. I was like, oh, this is really different. So I went home and I said, look, all he needs is 2,000 more votes in these 10 counties, and it's over. Not just Pennsylvania, but also the rest, in North Carolina, Wisconsin, Florida, Michigan, and Ohio. Why? Because Pennsylvania is 5 points more Democratic than those states. So in July 2016, I said, it's over, y'all just don't know it yet. And so what have we learned since Election Day? Not much has changed. I often tell people, people say, well, what's going on? What's different? I said, nothing has changed since November 9th, 2016, about 2 o'clock in the morning. If you voted for Donald Trump, you're happy and you're optimistic about the future. If you didn't vote for him, your hair is on fire and it cannot be extinguished by any known man-made object, and it will not be able to be extinguished until he is carted out of office. And we pretty much haven't changed. Now, the part of that polarization problem in our country is that we have picked sides, and we put our team jerseys on every morning, and so that's sort of our challenge. But how we got this? How much time? I have 1 minute left. Okay, this conservative populist coalition. When we went out to do the book, we wanted to understand. I went to the 5 states that voted Obama, Trump. And I wanted to understand these swing states and why people changed. They were Republicans, Democrats, and independents. People who shouldn't have voted for him but did. And I wanted to understand sort of why this happened. And if this was a fluke, or if this is the new conservative populist coalition. If this is the new Republican Party, it is. Whether you like it or not, this is the new Republican Party. And it is ripe with opportunity for conservatives from the old guard to bring them together with ideas and ideals that are important to you, but it is also ripe with opportunity for them to show you what life has been like outside of the major urban centers. Where community is the most important thing, where people live in the same street. I mean, where I come from in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 8 out of 10 people live within 4 miles of the house they grew up in. There is the difference between the placed and the placeless. And the community is the most important thing, and we don't think about that when we talk about American politics. It's just not part of the discussion, and I think, as JD aptly noted this morning, if you heard his speech about community and children and family, that rootedness is one of the most important things. The one final point I'd like to make is culture is having a huge impact in our country. Why? Because the decision makers in culture, whether it's national media or a large corporation or the NFL, are all located in the same super zip codes. And everyone thinks the same and doesn't know anybody like me. Think about the NFL. Does anybody know where the NFL is located? What street? Park Avenue, New York. What do they have in common with the dude who saves money all year, paints his face, gets half toasted before he goes to the game, tailgates with the guy he went to high school with, and then goes to the game? Absolutely nothing. They should be located in Canton, Ohio. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough decision makers in all of our larger institutions, whether it's culture or Hollywood or government or politics. As far as I'm concerned, the RNC and DNC should move to Cleveland and Columbus, Ohio, because then they would be more connected to the people that they serve, not the same people that living in a company town. It's just not fruitful. You just don't have an understanding. And the NFL decided at that moment on Park Avenue to become a social justice organization instead of an entertainment organization. That's why they lost 8% of their revenue or viewership in 2016 and 9% in 2017. So culture has a large part of the problem. And I have another minute. I think they added that. So we're no different today than we were on election day. Part of the problem, I think, in my industry, in the media, is that there's not enough diversity in the newsroom, and I don't even mean by color, and that is also incredibly important. But there's not also a cultural diversity. There's not enough people that sit in a newsroom, that sit in a pew every Sunday, or sit in church, synagogue, or go to temple, who own a gun, who know what the parts of a gun are. All those things are important when covering critically important things that happen in society. That has also caused that large disconnect between DC and New York and the rest of the country. Thank you.